Welcome to another episode of the Cannabis Review. I am delighted to be joined in this episode by Neasa Hourigan, who is the Green Party TD. How are you keeping, Neasa? Are you well?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you on the show. You're the first person from the government that we've had an opportunity to speak and put a few questions to yourself. Well, thank you very much for taking your time. I know you're very busy in your day. So
First person from the government. I'm worried now.
yeah. No, well, as I said, this is a business show. This is nothing more than basically trying to provide some information and education to any of the viewers who are looking, young entrepreneurs or people looking to pivot into this industry, which will be an exciting new sector, regardless of the political party in charge. I think it's an if not when now, or when not if. It's basically the first thing I wanted to talk to you about. I'm going to keep you in and out within the time slot. It's basically the laws that Ireland have are not in tandem with the EU. Are you aware of the European ruling that happened in relation to the regulation of THC quantities in hemp?
I am, and I think increasingly what we're seeing is other jurisdictions and countries moving beyond Ireland's understanding of the cannabis issue and the hemp issue and THC and CBD. There's a real recognition of not just the medicinal qualities of cannabis, but the therapeutic qualities of it. And therefore, I think, whereas we do need to probably reform, well, from my point of view, we definitely need to reform domestically. I do think that there's a serious question now around bringing ourselves into line with the European norm, because we do live within, a community of nations, and it only makes sense that for trade and for business, we have similar standards, and we see that in food, we see that in medicines, and I think that we need to make sure that we align very well in this area too.
Perfect. And who do you think is the person that is responsible for enacting that? Is there a series of people working in the background working on it? There's a specific party? Is there something that can happen to be able to enact that further and to stop some of, let's say, the clampdowns that have happened on some of the stores like Bloom's and Little Collins, which have kind of been completely unnecessary and seems to be a waste of taxpayer money just because there hasn't been a catch up within the European ruling? Is there a specific person
Yeah,
that needs to be lobbied on
I
that?
think when we saw those kind of incidents, it just shows, how lacking in clarity our own domestic policies are, and how, like the Gardaí will take their instruction from legislation, and when there's a lack of clarity there, they'll revert to the status quo. And so I think those very unfortunate incidents, and I'm sure incredibly difficult for the people involved, really show that the EU community in which we live has moved beyond what our domestic law is capable of dealing with, and I think it straddles a number of departments. So that would be something I think for the enterprise department to consider, really. And certainly if you're talking about the EU region, that's something that they should be concerning themselves with. But obviously a lot of the regulation would be happening in the Department of Health, so it's something that we're going to need collaboration across a number of departments to get right. But I do think that it implies a requirement for greater reform more generally.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think there's any blame that needs to be put towards the guards in this. I think they're following basically laws that they're being told to enact, and they have no ability to be able to understand the difference between what a CBD bud of flower looks like compared to a THC bud. So there's no
Well,
real.
this is it, absolutely. And I would say that more generally, like, politicians aren't the experts on this,
Yeah.
because usually what you're doing is you're trying to get the experts in the room, and the experts are not just the professional experts or the business experts, but also the people who have the lived experience of what the impact of particular legislation is. And so it's really important to kind of start listening to what people's on the ground experience of this kind of thing is. And certainly the Gardaí are not expected to be experts.
Yeah.
They'll be instructed how to deal with certain legislation or the lack thereof. And therefore they're sometimes in a very difficult position. I have to say my experience of Gardaí is that they are very well aware of the kind of spectrum of usage that's involved here, and it's just that we don't necessarily have the legislative framework in place to help them to do their job well in this area.
Yeah, and I think one of the trends that's going to be happening and growing bigger and bigger, that probably at the very start now was kind of the cruxus of the issue, is the ability for CBD flower to be sold. You've never seen that on the market before. It's always been kind of illegal, illicit, high THC content, where that European ruling allows for a CBD flower to be sold. And it's said it's that understanding from the guards and the retailer that is kind of the little hole in that area there. One of the next topics I want to jump onto is the biggest fears from politicians on our legal industry. Is this, is it basically lack of education on the topic here, or is it won't somebody please think of the children type screaming from the roof? Is there a direct
I
root
think
of why there's such a hindrance against it?
there's definitely a bit of that, and I think that, you know, during the government negotiations we had, it was probably one of the most fraught conversations that we had with our government partners, because our own policy would be to make it a category 4 drug, and that we would be promoting the creation of cannabis cafes, and that there would be a legal pathway, like a fully taxed legal pathway to the provision of cannabis substances. And that did elicit reactions that I would say are kind of fear-based. And one of the phrases I heard a lot was that it's a gateway drug. And I think that my reaction to that is always, it is right now. It is a
Yeah.
gateway drug now, because it's an illegal drug and you place people in the realm of criminal behavior. And therefore, if you want to access any of these products, you often have to have an engagement with criminal actors. And therefore, you know, it's more likely that misuse would escalate when you're into that world. So we have, through a lack of, you know, moving with the times and moving with the requirement for new legislation, we have created a situation where this product can be a gateway drug, because it moves people into an area that they shouldn't be, and it should be something that is legal and regulated. So I think that there is a definite and genuine concern for younger people, and I wouldn't discount that, and I wouldn't underplay that. But my feeling is that that is mostly based on not a direct experience of the issue. And I think that I know we're going to talk later about, you know, the way forward and everything, but I think it's incredibly important that we expose both the general public and politicians to, you know, the reality of what this means for people, both the reality of what a more legal framework would provide for people, and how it might safeguard them, but also the reality of what we do right now, which is place them in contact with, you know, gangs and illegal and criminal conduct. We also make them incredibly unsafe, because the product isn't regulated, and people can be imbibing anything. So I think it's just more about educating them and making that information available to them. I think it's an argument that you know, or it's a discussion that would be really useful, and you could win the argument by simply placing all of the facts on the table and having an honest, not fear-based discussion around it.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the simplest way to try and explain to some of the politicians, that is, if their teenage child is going out to let's say test something, whether it's alcohol or whatever it is, kids are kids, they're all going to get into some sort of mischief at some stage. At the moment, if you're going to get into cannabis, your only market is to go to a dealer who's also selling them cocaine, could also sell them pills, could also sell them a myriad of other drugs, where the option should be that there's a cafe that sells CBD flower that has no THC in it. And if there is a route into this, into smoking cannabis or consuming cannabis in any way, shape or form, that it's the most tepid version you could possibly get, as opposed to they're sending kids out into scenarios that's either A, going to harden them, or B, send them down the wrong path.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that you know, it's there is a real spectrum of opinion about this, and I think that politicians particularly are overly influenced by an older, more conservative voter, because those are the people that vote, right?
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
reality. And there's also there's always a framing on all political action like that. I am worried that even as we kind of start to make more progress on kind of the medicinal side of things, and we start to see reform there, that all of the larger three parties are really still at the stage of maybe considering decriminalization. Now, to me, decriminalization is in some ways the worst of all worlds, because it's still an unregulated drug, and that doesn't really protect that young person. And that's really my concern here, is that, like, I would be coming from the place where, look, on balance, and I'm not undercutting or saying that there is no negative aspects to cannabis use. I
Of course,
personally completely agree that, and I take those very seriously. But on balance, I would prefer to trust people and help them to make decisions in a safe way than have a draconian criminal legislation around the issue and put all of the actual decision making in the hands of criminal gangs.
Yeah, no, well, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. We're going to move on to the last topic now. Before I do, I just want to get clarity on, we basically talked to pretty much most of the departments. It's the Minister for Health who's responsible for any legislation that would move forward. We're all correct, so everybody can agree on that. That is the person who does make the decision. It's not the Justice Department, it's not the Guards, it's the realm within the Department of Health to make this reform discussion.
Yes, that's my understanding of it, and because it would be a regulated drug, it would be in that public health and well-being area, and that's why I've been talking to Minister Frank Fien around pushing forward the Drugs Citizens Assembly, which I know we're going to talk about now, but that he would be in the Department for Health. So, although I have to say, as we move through, there absolutely would be issues around, like, well, how would we regulate it then? And that would be an issue for justice. And then how would we tax it? That's a really important part of it, because obviously we don't want to tax it out of existence, so then it still remains in the way cigarettes have become so expensive, and now there's a whole kind of criminal enterprise around cheap cigarettes. We don't want to. Maybe there's a sliding scale of taxation around the content.
Well, we
so
sent in a good taxation system to the chairman of the revenue and got a reply from the office. So again, I think you're right. It's the different departments need to come together, but somebody needs to put on their leadership hat and realize that this population that's getting old are all used to this. It's not as if they're that older population. The 14, 50-year-olds now have lived through nightclubs. They've lived through socializing. It's not as if it's a different mentality and mindset. And they're going to want to have a comfortable later on in life. And this is one of the products that'll be available to somebody who's 50 or 60 with arthritis or a number of other different ailments. So I'm conscious of the time now. I want to get you out on the last topic. So the way forward, is it a citizens' assembly, or what do you suggest is the best way forward for the industry to get legalised in Ireland?
Well, as I said, we in the Greens have for a long time been supportive of kind of reform in this area, and our policy is for cannabis cafes and for a fully regulated provision, like a pathway to supply, and that you could have your own personal plants, and so I think it was very important to us to get something into the programme for government around this. Now we're dealing with two parties who really don't share our views at all, and it was a very heated discussion, and what we got in the end was the Citizens' Assembly. Now, I suppose my view on this is that there genuinely is very strong opinions on both sides on this, and some people want to see it completely criminalized and absolutely nothing, and won't accept that the kind of war on drugs strategy has kind of failed. And on the other hand, you have people who want absolutely no regulation. They just want to be able, it's a natural thing, let's just everybody do what they want with it. And I mean, in a world where we're starting to tax sugar because we know it's bad, I don't think that that's reasonable either. So I think the best thing to do is to get everybody in a room, and then nobody has to have the answer going into the room, but we'll come out with the answer afterwards. And that's what a Citizens' Assembly does. And where there is a social issue, where there's a real and genuine, and I have to say, even those who I strongly disagree with on the full criminalization side of things, their concerns are genuine and need to be heard and need to be taken seriously, where there's a genuine fear around it. And I would liken this to repeal. Getting people in that room and allowing them to to consider all of the science and all of the lived experience and come to some, serious conclusions around that. I think that that's the best way forward. None of the three larger parties, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, support legalisation fully. And therefore, there is no legislative route with the larger parties to get there yet. And if we can get us into this assembly that's based on, hearing testimony and based on those 100 people taking the time to do it properly, I think that is a way to find that middle ground that works for people. And I have to say, the Irish public generally are a little bit further along than politicians on a lot of social issues. I think they're further along on this, and I think they're very mindful that there's increasingly strong substances available out there that have cannabis that's been sprayed with all sorts of things. High levels of we don't know what sprayed onto stuff. I think there's a real acceptance now that we need to move ahead. I would like to see legalization, but I don't need. I think the great thing about the Citizens' Assembly is I don't need to have all of those answers. All we need to do is create a situation where those 100 people can come up with some right answers that work for the Irish context and for Irish society.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Both sides of the coin need to be heard equally, and the facts should be able to win the argument out. So if we can ever help in reaching out and finding people, I think a top 5 stories from either argument, for and against, and have 5 real life stories for and against, and see which ones are the most compelling and offer the best argument for legalization. I want to thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy lady. I'd be remiss if I didn't say to you, will you ask Stephen Donnelly to talk to Vera? It's trending on Twitter again. The lady has been going months spending money that she shouldn't have to spend on a kid just to keep it safe, when it's basically just a simple little enaction of a law over here that could save this woman a lot of hassle and make her life a lot easier. So get him to talk to Vera.
I will talk to him about that.
Thank you very much, Neasa. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You're very good for coming on the show, and you've given some great answers for everybody to have a think about. So if we can help you in any way, shape or form when anything moving forward, just reach out to us, and you have a great day, okay?
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Have a good day, everybody.